Okay, it's great that you're here today joining in. We do make it a requirement that you have either like attended an information session, and this is the only one that we're offering this year, or you have watched the recording of this session, so that's why we're recording it. We want you to have the basics before you come and meet with an advisor. That way you can make the most of your time in developing your application essays and that sort of thing. So I'll go through kind of briefly the preliminary kind of basics of what the critical language scholarship is, what it offers, and then we're going to dive right into the application components itself, paying particular attention to the short answer responses and the personal statement or the statement of purpose. Those are the things that are really going to be crucial for you to understand how to approach in order to make the most competitive application possible. So thank you for jumping on this call today and for attending, and we'll kind of just jump right in. If you'll leave yourself unmuted, and if you'll leave yourself muted and your video off, that's preferable as we go through this. I have a pretty hard stop at 10 until like 10 to 1. So if we get to the end and there's time for questions, I'll stop the recording and I'd be happy to take them. But for now, we're going to just try to get through the content. So if you'll hold your questions for the end, and if we don't have time at the end, I'd be happy to answer them by email, and I welcome you to send them to CLS fellowship@georgetown.edu. Okay, so basically what is the Critical Language Scholarship? The Critical Language Scholarship is essentially a State Department funded opportunity that allows for American citizens to go abroad and have an intense cultural immersive experience that helps you develop one of the State Department's defined critical languages. And this has been around since 2006, and it is administered by the American Councils, which is the kind of contractor that does the entire process of promoting, recruiting, and selecting. So the State Department doesn't have a hand in that process. They have given that contract to the American Councils, and that's where if you kind of, this is, yes, a State Department funded opportunity, and it's run through the American Councils, and then we are Georgetown University, your advising institution. So just helping you understand the landscape of how this scholarship is, kind of assessed, right? So basically, for each of the languages that offer or that participate or offer opportunities for language study, you in all instances will be offered an 8 to 10 week intensive language and cultural immersion program. In the program, you're going to be doing an intense amount of language study, so much so that within 8 to 10 weeks, they have said and have measured that your language gains would be that as if you had studied for that language for an entire academic year. So it's pretty intense. It's language training, 20 hours a week of formal classroom in class instruction. You're also then doing a ton of stuff outside the classroom, cultural activities, lots of different excursions, lots of different seminars, that kind of thing, that are all centered on helping you with the language acquisition. So here are the languages that are offered this year with the Critical Language Scholarship, and we've segmented these into 3 different types because there are a few languages that you have to have some base in before you are allowed to apply for that language, okay? So those that require prior study are the Arabic, Korean, Portuguese, and Russian. You need 1 year or the equivalent of 1 academic year of language study. There are often folks that have had deep experience with a language but have not had formal instruction, and then I wonder about their eligibility. If you can pretty much demonstrate through your own rationale that whether because it was spoken in the home or because you've done a lot of work or immersive experiences in the country before, and none of that is showing up on your transcript, that's totally fine. You can articulate that in your application as long as you feel prepared for the language level that you're signing up for. That's completely fine, right? So it doesn't have to be formal classroom 1 year of study or 2 years of study for Chinese and Japanese. In those instances, they're looking for you to have that base level of competency so that you actually thrive on the program. It's really not about like needing to clear a bar so much as it is you need to come in to be able to make the advances that you need to make with that base level knowledge. For all of the other languages that are offered through the Critical Language Scholarship Program, Azerbaijani, Bangla, Hindi, Indonesian, Persian, Punjabi, Swahili, Turkish, and Urdu, you don't need any prior study. So you can start as a complete novice. That said, there are also different levels that you might indicate or sign up for, right? So it's not that all of those languages are just for entry-level learners. They have levels for entry-level learners. They also have intermediate and advanced levels for those languages too, if you already are bringing some of those other skill sets in the languages that don't necessarily require them to participate in the program. If you have questions about language level and which one you should apply for, and maybe you've got 2 languages and you're trying to figure out which one would be best for the Critical Language Scholarship, those are all questions that are going to be best addressed in an advising session or by email, where we can get a little bit more detail about your specific language competency and your language goals that you have. Okay, one of the most important things is that you must be a US citizen in order to apply for this. Again, State Department funds. This is for American citizens, for those that are demonstrating kind of the commitment to being able to use that language in the American workforce, essentially. You must be enrolled in an undergraduate program or a graduate program at the time of application. What's great about this is if you're currently a senior, or maybe you're in your last year of your graduate degree program and you're enrolled right now and you apply right now, but hey, maybe you graduate in December, or maybe you graduate in May, and then the program would begin in 2020, completely fine. You don't have to be enrolled when you're in and on the Critical Language Scholarship Program. You only need to be enrolled when you apply. So that would be this November. So anyone on this call, I assume, would be eligible from that respect. Okay, what's covered? International and domestic travel between the US and Washington, DC, and the CLS program site. Visa fees, the pre-departure orientation in Washington, DC, kind of like a trip that everybody goes on and gets together to learn about, how to make the most out of their experience before they go to their various sites. It includes all of the language instruction, the room, the board, the travel within the host country, entrance fees, an oral proficiency assessment examination both before and after you do the award to kind of demonstrate your, not for anything, not for them, but necessarily, not for, some people get worried about the assessment. They're like, what if I don't have that 1 year of language gains? It's not anything about how you are required to have some sort of language gain while you're there. You will indeed get a language gain, but they're not interested in assessing that in any sort of like critical or evaluative way. They just have you do the pre-test to make sure they place you in the right level, because even if you identified intermediate, maybe you would actually be better in a beginner class, and that's fine. If you're selected, they're just going to put you in the beginner based on that OPI assessment. Also, on the converse, if you end up kind of saying, I want to do intermediate Arabic, and that's what you self-identify as, but you take that OPI and they realize that like, hey, you're actually much higher than you are indicating even for yourself, so we're going to put you in the advanced stage, right? So that OPI helps them actually place you once you've been selected. And then they do that again after you have completed the intensive language program, so that they can have some ability to measure the impact of the language they're providing you. It's not to say you have to get to this certain level, or you need to reimburse us or something. It's not like that at all, okay? It's just sort of so that they can see how well those programs that they are designing are, how effective they are. What's really cool is not only is this entire thing paid for, they're going to give you academic credit for the opportunity through Ben Mar College. So you can get credit that transfers directly to Georgetown, right, through Bryn Mawr in participating in this program. So the entire thing's paid for, and then you can, on top of that, save yourself, thousands of dollars essentially for not having to necessarily enroll in additional language courses. Maybe you get the final amount of language credits that you need, or you can use it as electives or whatever. I think it's pretty neat. What is not covered are passport fees, any sort of medical examinations that are required before and during you go, that kind of stuff. But mostly it's pretty comprehensive, and you'll find it's very generous. They're really looking for individuals that can succeed in an intense academic setting. So it's no joke. You are in class a ton. All you're going to do is be subsumed by that language. in many instances, there are language contracts where they ask you not even to speak English, right, the entire time. That can be challenging, especially if you are really kind of going to a new country for the first time, or if you are for the first time picking up a language. That's pretty intimidating. So some of those things they're going to be kind of assessing in the short answer essays and in the personal statement to say, like, does this person have the flexibility, the adaptability, the commitment, the rigor, the grit to do this kind of intensive 8 to 10 week program? And we'll talk about how that might play out in your short answers here in a second. They want to see commitment to the language learning. This is not an educational tourism, right? It's not like, oh, I'm going to go, learn a year of Bangla and hang out and see a new culture and then come back and just resume Spanish or whatever, right? They want to see that you are committed to learning the language, even if it's an early commitment. Maybe you're taking the language for the first time. They still want to see that you're committed to continuing to learn that language even after the program concludes. They also want to know like how learning this language is not just like a hobby, that you're going to be able to put it to use in some sort of professional or academic capacity. So obviously, if you're a freshman, you may not be thinking right now about that kind of like 5 years out post-grad place and how you might be using that language. Maybe right now you're thinking about language development as it's related to your major in regional comparative studies. And you're saying like, this is, part of my proficiency that I'm declaring with the SFS, and I want to do this for all these reasons. And it's really going to help inform, like as I move forward in my discipline or my learning here at Georgetown. That's totally fine. Now, if you're a senior or a graduate student, you're going to want to be making the connection between the language learning and how you're going to actually use that in your professional career, because that's what's up next for you, right? So you are going to be making an argument in your application that you can hack it, with the challenging nature of the academic program, that you're committed to learning that language, both while you're on the program and after you come back, and that you're making a point about the connection between your desire to improve your knowledge of that language and how it relates to your academic and or career goals. And of course, they want folks that are able to adapt to intensive programs in new cultural environments. Okay, basically the application components consist of biographical information, academic information, major, that kind of stuff, school. And they say an unofficial transcript, but here's the problem. Our unofficial transcript does not have the name of our academic institution on the transcript. It's very disappointing. It's actually ludicrous, but yes, you will find that when you go in My Access and you download your transcript, your unofficial transcript, that nowhere on the entire document does the words Georgetown University appear. And until that is corrected, Georgetown students must submit their official transcript because it has the name of the institution on it with your name. All of the data is there that they need. Most other campuses, most other schools, even their unofficial transcript will have the name of their institution on it, so it's totally fine. But for our campus, for your application, you need to go ahead right now and submit a request for your official transcript, and that's what needs to be uploaded to your application. You will need to kind of comment on prior language study background in your application, so there'll be some blanks in there where they're going to ask you about what kind of prior language learning you've had and what form that has taken. You will need 2 letters of recommendation, and at least one of them must be from a professor that's taught you, either taught you a course that's related to perhaps the language or taught you that language itself. I would say that diversity in terms of your recommendations is good. You should not just have 2 language professors both writing for you for this. There needs to be a little bit of range. Maybe you have 1 language professor write for you. Maybe you have 1 professor that teaches you a course in the region. Or maybe you're learning this language for the first time, so you have 1 professor that's teaching you in a regional course, and you have a professional reference coming from an internship that is related to your long-term career goals. Those sorts of things would be fine. This is one of the things that you may want to think about asking for now. The deadline is next month, right? We're already well kind of into October. You want to give them at least 2 to 3 weeks notice before asking, or before the deadline for the letter of recommendation. So one of the first things that you might want to do this weekend is figure out your application plan, which language you're applying for, and the individuals that you think are best suited to offer a recommendation, and to think about preparing for those asks now. Otherwise, you have a little bit of time to work on the essays and get the pieces together and order your official transcript. But those conversations with recommenders need to be your priority at this point if you know you will apply. They have information, or they'll ask you questions about your employment history and previous programs and honors and fellowships, et cetera. And then the meat of the application, which is the short essays and sorry, that's not on the slide, the statement of purpose. And we'll get into that now. But first, let's actually do a little bit of an overview. So the application will be due on November 19th, 2019. And while recommendations have a little bit more leeway in terms of the deadline, I recommend that you tell your recommenders to have their recommendations in by the 19th. Give them the exact same deadline as the one that you're pushing towards. That way, in case anything happens and it comes late, it won't be too late to be considered. Because there are only 2 letters of recommendation required, you have to have them both to be considered. There are indeed fellowships where you will still be considered if you have most of the recommendations in, even though that makes it more challenging. But this one, you're completely ineligible if you don't get those 2 in. So make sure that you're communicating upfront, early, and giving your recommenders a deadline that actually precedes their real deadline, which is the 22nd. Please give them the 19th as the deadline, just so that way you help yourself. Faculty are busy. They don't always make timelines. They are people too. So let's just make sure that all of those pieces get in, because the last thing you want to do is work really hard on all your essays and then have your application DOA because of a recommender. Okay. In late January, you would figure out whether you have passed through the initial round of review, round 1, by email, either way. And if you have moved into the next phase, you can expect an early February semifinal interview. And then you would get notification if you've made it through those steps on whether or not you will be receiving the grant in early March of 2020. And then it would begin in the summer. Typically, it's over June and July. Okay, there are 4 short essays and 1 statement of purpose. And they're all between 200 and 500 words. So they're really not that much, but there are several of them. One of the things before I get into how to address the essays, like what some strategies are, just some best practices here. I say don't try to do all of these at once, right? Even though they're short, you want to think about, maybe doing, maybe this weekend you start on the statement of purpose. I always recommend starting with the statement of purpose first. Most people start with that last. But this is sort of the bigger statement. This is the statement of how and why you're thinking about the significance of this language opportunity. And I think about using the short answer essays as addressing other elements in your candidacy that you couldn't fit into the statement of purpose. But no matter which way you decide to tackle the essays, try to break it up over time. Your writing will be more thoughtful, and you'll be able to give more energy and attention across your application, as opposed to just trying to pop everything out at once and then come back and revise it later. So with that said, the first question is actually one on resilience. They want to be able to understand whether or not you kind of have the openness and flexibility and tolerance, the resilience that's needed to succeed on an intensive program. So the way that they try to assess that is by asking you to give an example of a situation where you had to adapt to a new environment. And then to say, well, based on that situation, what are those kind of features that you can pull out that predict that you will be able to rely on strategies or approaches in the future when you face a similarly new and unfamiliar situation? And they ask that this essay is offered within 300 words. Okay, so here's the thing. Tips. Number 1, notice that there are 2 parts to the question. They're asking you 2 things. They're asking you for a specific example of a time when you encountered a new situation. And then 2, how did you overcome that? Sorry, let me go back to the prompt. A new environment, adaptation. How did you adapt to that new environment? What strategies did you use to assimilate or to kind of integrate yourself into the new environment? So they want you to tell an example and then to reflect on that, right? And to say, here's what I learned and here's how I might use that in the future. In all of these short answer essays, you want to attend to the introduction, because the moment you say this, the moment you say, I have had many instances where I've had to adapt to new environments. I am already skimming this. I'm already bored, right? You want to make sure every single sentence, every single first sentence of all of these short answer essays and the statement of purpose start with something that engages me, that pulls me into the reading, that makes me want to know more, that feeds my human, kind of natural inclination for, difference and curiosity. Because let me tell you, I have sat on the selection committee for Persian, Chinese, and Arabic, and I do not speak all those, but they ask that fellowship advisors come and take part in the advising of languages from the kind of holistic, how does this fit with one's career trajectory perspective. And I have read 70 applications all for one language, back to back to back to back. And when you do that, that first sentence tells you whether or not you're going to skim or whether you're going to attend to what's written here, because you will see so many applications that say, one of the greatest strengths that I have when encountering new situations is to rely on openness and flexibility. Number one, those are all just words that don't mean anything. And number two, like, it's boring, right? So here's an example of something that gives me a story, brings me right into the theme of what this person is trying to say, and then on the second part reflects on how they'll use that skill in the future, right? So I'm not going to read this whole thing, but you can even tell right now you're interested. Move the keyboard an inch to the right and place the salt shaker 3 inches from the oven, were the orders that incited intense frustration within me. They were constantly thrown at me by my boss, who was legally blind, as her personal assistant. Okay, so she's talking about a new environment, like having to adapt to a new set of, norms, and how that was frustrating. And then there's a moment of growth. There's a moment in this essay where she learns that there are times when she needs to be more flexible based on another person's needs. And really that's the takeaway here, okay? This is recorded as well, so we're going to move on. If you wanted to come back and to read more about how the person did this and the pivots that they made, this will be available to you, so don't freak out too much. All right, essay number 2. This one is on preparation. This is a group-based activity, right? You're going to be in a new cultural environment. It's going to be intense, as they keep saying. And this is about building new relationships with people in another language. This is about diversity that you may encounter and maintaining positive group relationships. Because not only is this an intense program where you're doing a lot of language learning, you're with a lot of people all day long. And so some people love it and they thrive in those situations. If you're like me, at the end of a very long day and being around people all the time, I don't want to be around people anymore. So for 10 weeks, you're going to do nothing but be around people. You're going to be around people that you are learning with. You're going to be around instructors. You're going to be around people in your host community. And that can be draining, right? So there's a lot in that. And what they want to know in this essay is about how, for you, what for you will be the most challenging aspect. And then secondly, after that, what will you draw on? What skills or knowledge or experiences will you draw on that allow you to meet challenges or to overcome them or to at least face them? All right, so how should you tackle this one? First of all, notice that this is a 2-part question again. They want to know about a real specific challenge, and then what are those key strategies given past challenges that you will rely on when you're faced with similar challenges while in country? So the tips are here, besides the part that it's an example and a reflection again, just like our last essay, is you want to keep variety in mind. Now, what do I mean by that? There are 4 short answer essays and 1 statement of purpose. You cannot use the same, I mean, you can if you want, but it is not as interesting for you to use the same experience when you were abroad in Jordan for every single essay. If you want to study Arabic and you've been to Jordan, and then you want to use the time I was in Amman studying in essay 1 and the time that I was in Jordan again, and then and so on and so forth, and then your statement of purpose talks about when you were studying abroad in the past, it's not enough. You need more variety. you need to think about how even in domestic, not even at Georgetown, maybe when you came from, your hometown to college, there was cultural adjustments. Think about variety of settings and locations and stories so that you don't end up kind of seeming redundant about the same experience across all of these essays, okay? And then don't try to game the system. Like, this is not a space where, it's a challenge. So let me figure out a clever way to find a challenge that's actually like a great strength of mine. This is a moment where you need to be reflective and think like, hey, what's going to be hard? Be real about that. And then say, okay, here's how, even I know myself, this is going to be the challenging thing about being around people all day. Here's how I'm going to try to work on that, and it's going to be difficult, but I'm ready to face that challenge. That's what they want to see. So again, here we have an example. Notice the specificity here. Nobody else could have written this statement but the person that wrote it. So, sorry, all these little black boxes are redactions, so we just want to keep the essays as anonymous as possible. But anyway, XYZ, my best friend in India, was never quite on the same page as me with regards to privacy. Fascinated by my smartphone, he always wanted to explore it on his own, but I never allowed that. I considered a phone my private possession. Visibly offended, XYZ thought otherwise, and he would complain about my apparent obsession with secrecy, and he doubted our friendship, okay? So just talking about cultural differences or challenges, or how you have to overcome these reactions, and so on and so forth. And then the second part of this essay, you see in the third paragraph, I envision that these challenges, privacy and disagreement with my host community, and among other Americans, will reemerge in CLS in India, okay? So real challenges based on past experience, be specific with it, and then say how you're going to overcome it. And it can be as simple as this person indicates, taking 5 minutes each morning just to breathe will diminish the anxiety that these interpersonal conflicts cause. And remember that they constitute opportunities for growth. Spending 10 minutes each night journaling, simple strategies, but they're specific and they're real. They're not amorphous, like, I'll remind myself to be centered. Now, what does that mean? Okay, that means taking time to do breathing exercises in the morning. That means taking time to journal at night. That's the level of specificity that we want in these essays. 95% of the time when people come in and want feedback on their essays, I'm asking them to be more specific. What do you mean by this? That, cross-culturalism, what does that mean? I'm prepared to be open and flexible. Okay, what does that mean, right? If you can continue to push yourself to be specific with your examples of those things, you'll go a long way in keeping your reader engaged and demonstrating that you are equipped and prepared to do this program. Citizen diplomacy. Make the case for how you will serve as an effective citizen diplomat abroad. How could you contribute to the mission of building mutual understanding between the people of your home community and the people of your host community? 300 words. Okay, they ask you to make a case about, this one is more about engaging with diversity and representing the values that you hold to be true. One of the things that is the big misstep in this essay is being like flying too high at that 50,000 foot, level. You want to avoid like these empty kind of jargony platitudes around diplomacy, and ambassadorialism and all that kind of thing, and ground it in real exchanges of a time when you had to be diplomatic, because honestly, this one is mostly about mutual understanding and how you aren't reactive in instances of disagreement or discord, how you work towards understanding another given their own unique personal experiences, and how you have a subset of values that are informed by your culture that you hope to share as appropriate with others in interacting with them. So you'll see here in the short answer or short essay 3, think about how specific this opener is. Xenophobic is a strong word, but I would be lying if I didn't consider it an accurate description of my home environment. Growing up in Louisiana, I heard criticism of immigrants, foreigners, and anyone different on almost a daily basis. The constant separation between us and them, however, only fostered curiosity in me. South Louisiana made me interested in people from other places, and so on and so forth. And the person decides to talk about openness to curiosity, but it's grounded in a real experience of his or her past upbringing, and how that person wants to support those sort of diplomatic values abroad. okay? So this is about being a good citizen. It's about how do you display those skills, and it's mostly about how do you use and invest in those skills even when it's really hard, even when you face someone who disagrees with you. So this is what, think about a moment of disagreement, of discord, and when you overcame that because you understood that it wasn't worth, you know, like ripping apart a relationship, right? And this can be with people of other cultures, but this could also be in your family. This could be in your home. This could be with your roommate, right? There are ways to think about specific examples of overcoming a challenge and being diplomatic, and make it specific. Again, I'm sorry to keep saying that like over and over again, but that's like one of the best ways to take your application from fading into the background to propelling it right up to the top of the heap. Short essay number 4, commitment to language study. What they're going to ask you here, what interests you about your chosen target language, and how you will continue to study this language after the CLS. This is a very short one, 200 words. Basically, you can sum it down to this: how you're going to use it and how you're going to maintain it, right? So the language that you want, how are you going to use it? And then how are you going to keep using it is basically what they want to hear here. But again, I'm pointing out the specificity of this essay that says, you know, as an Asian immigrant in New York, I face several challenges that are unique to my Indian background. Therefore, I personally understand the importance of having culturally competent healthcare. I aim to attain, so we're talking about this person's career trajectory and why they want this language as they propose to be a healthcare provider in the future in an immigrant or a heavy sort of Korean immigrant geographic location in New York. And then all of the ways after, the second part is all of the ways after the CLS, the person will continue through cultural programs and engaging in, you know, language learning. The person will further their language skill. So specific ways you're going to use it, specific ways you're going to maintain it. That's essay number 4, 200 words. And then lastly, we have the statement of purpose. And here's where the prompts get a little bit confusing, because if you literally answered the prompts are really good on all the other ones. But if you literally just like bulleted your essay into 3 points, you wouldn't have the cohesive statement that they're looking for here, okay? I think these are questions to get you started thinking about how you're going to address it, but I'm going to tell you in a second really what I think you want to think about in terms of designing a response to the statement of purpose. This is the big essay. Again, I suggested that you try this one first, make sure this one is down pat, and then move on to the short ones. So in 500 words, they want to know basically like, why are you applying for CLS? If you look on the lower right-hand corner of this slide, where I have some bulleted suggestions or tips for you, again, I sort of gave be careful about following the prompts quite literally, or you end up with a less cohesive narrative. You want to tell a story if possible. And here's what I want you to really think about. Think about your career and academic trajectory or academic trajectory. Why you're doing this and how you're going to use this in the future and its significance to you. And I want you to think about being specific with a future goal. Even if you're not quite sure right now, pick something. Pick something that feels genuine to you, that you can propose. This is not a contract. They are aware that your plans will change after you continue your education, after you continue your professional experience. All of those things are in their mind when they're reading this, so you don't have to like absolutely commit to something you propose. You can say, in the future, I aspire to do something like this in this sector, and this is why that language would be important. So here I've given you another example of a person who is interested in an economic PhD for education and health interventions in India, and why then that this language is really important to him or her, and how all of these sort of language learning opportunities come together to support a well-rounded career in the future. That's really what this one is about. The purpose of you doing this is to likely prepare for an academic and or career move. And that's what they want to hear here. But you can't just write it out. You've got to be able to tell a story, give an example, and then talk about your path going forward with specificity in terms of that future trajectory. So those are the pieces of the statement. I want to tell you right now that If you want an advising appointment, like I had mentioned earlier, you need to have watched this session. So now all participants on the call are cleared that hurdle and are free to set up one-on-one appointments. You do that by emailing clsfellowship@georgetown.edu, offering days and times in which you're free to meet. Please know that this is Friday and there are 3 CLS advisors, but we all have afternoon commitments. We will get back to you as soon as possible, but likely not today. Likely it will be Monday morning when we'll be able to get you booked in for a one-on-one appointment. We also have an intake form. It's not a lot, but it does ask your name, like what kind of questions you have, whether you want essay review, and it also asks if you have attended this session so that we keep track and make sure that people are getting this first. We can do advising sessions on questions that you have, or we can just sit down and work with you on the essays. Either one, it's up to you. Okay, I think that's all I have for you. Since we do have some time, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop the recording, and then I'm going to allow another 13 minutes. If you don't have questions, that's fine. But if you do have questions, please feel free to use the chat box. I'm not quite sure how many people are on the call, so I don't want to, hold on, let me stop recording real quick. I don't want to make it a free-for-all because it could get crazy.